Tommy Thomas says there are people who say Margaret Thatcher would have ordered the Royal Navy to stop the boats. She would have left the ECHR and confronted any country in Europe from where the small boats start. Would would anyone say she's far right? No, the Iron Lady. No, Iron Lady would be the name. Actually, Sunak is incrementally pursuing the same objective without any drastic action, such as what Thatcher would have done. But let's see the inflation data for November, which should be known shortly. Earlier in the year, when inflation was very high, people said Sunak was failing in his pledge. Now that it's failing, they say he has done nothing. He has nothing to do with it. Falling inflation is the key to win back voters, I think. Well, yeah. I don't doubt the second part of your response, but there is no certainty that this is, quote, what Thatcher would have done. And in fact, you are relying on a statement made by Neil Gardiner, I think, in September, widely promoted on GBNews. Now, Neil Gardiner is described rather embracingly as a former aide to Baroness Thatcher. He is or he was the director of the Thatcher Foundation. He never worked for Margaret Thatcher when she was in power. He's far too young, and he's taken on great responsibilities since then. He's a graduate of Oxford and Yale. He's a clever boy, but he is still, nevertheless, a bit of a boy, and I don't quite know how he thinks he's in a position to speak about the mind of Lady Thatcher. So I don't think there's any certainty that this is what Thatcher would have done. And I think it is certain, on the other hand, that she would never have left Europe on such appalling terms as we left under the influence of the dreadful Mrs. May and the appalling Boris Johnson and the execrable Liz Truss. And she would not have left without sorting out a replacement for Dublin III. It's the failure to replace Dublin III which has produced the small boats. And without arranging a favourable agreement for Northern Ireland. It's a failure to sort out Northern Ireland, which has tied up one of the more able ministers in the cabinet, Chris Heaton-Harris. And it's the reliance on the DUP by Mrs. May which has given them a jumped-up sense of self-importance. And so this is a catalogue of stupidity by the current Conservative leadership. And to draw a parallel between these political pygmies and Mrs. Thatcher is to live in some sort of cloud cuckoo land and a what-if reality rather than a genuine reality. Thatcher was a genuine reality person. Now, she may not have said and done everything that people would like, and many people resented her intensely, and many people would ascribe to her responsibility for many of the problems that we face today. But the reality is, Thatcher hid behind her Iron Lady accolade, and these ideas that the media put out that she was inflexible. She hid behind these, and in private she listened, and she changed her mind. And all you have to do, and I do urge everybody to do this, by the way, all you have to do is look at the manifestos during her time, and then look at what actually happened, and there's a big difference. A big difference. And yes, there were some laws which came out under her time which were deeply harmful. Clause 28 is one. And I think had she remained in power, it would have been modified and repealed much faster. It was in place for about 10 years. And it set a standard for President Putin. It's not just that it harmed people in the UK, it still harms people. Its influence is still felt. And Thatcher needs to take responsibility for that. Equally, her determination to overcome the miners. Well, her anti-strike legislation was never changed by Labour under Tony Blair because it's convenient. And it's convenient that she can be blamed for that action. But it destroyed the communities in the Midlands. Destroyed communities. I remember there were little towns like Colville. I remember going to school and going under the coal as it passed over the road, and then suddenly it wasn't there. And the whole coal mining community was gone. Overnight. And that is Thatcher's legacy. So this selective quoting of what people think Thatcher would have done, and this vague referencing. Go back and find who first said this. The person who first said this is Neil Gardiner, and the people who have been promoting this story are to be found on GBNews. This story is a nonsense. Enough.